in the spring of 1517, a Spanish conquistador named Hernando Cortez left Cuba on the last leg of a journey, a long journey that had started in Spain and was taking Cortez and his men to the Yucatan Peninsula. This was a journey with a very specific purpose. It was not just exploration. They weren't just checking out the territory. They had a purpose. There was something they were after. They were after a treasure that several other conquistadors and explorers, adventurers had tried to capture. Everybody so far had failed because it was one of the greatest treasures in the world. And yet it was guarded by one of the largest armies in the world, numbered in the tens of thousands. And so, Cortez left Cuba with 11 ships, 100 sailors, 500 men, 16 horses. The odds were not good, and the men knew it. The men were a long way from home. A lot of them had already started talking about going back. You know, anytime any individual or group of people start out on a worthwhile journey, they're going to find that the journey is long and it's hard and it's scary. And sure enough, somebody's always going to decide we can't do this. We need to turn around. That's the way it was with Cortez's men. And by the time they reached their destination, rowed up onto the shore in their small boats, a lot of the men were trembling. They were talking about mutiny. And so Cortez had all 600 men, the 100 sailors and the 500 soldiers. He had them line up on the beach, and they prepared for his speech. Hopefully there's going to be a plan A and a plan B, laying out a detailed strategy of who was to do what, just when and where and how. But instead, there was no speech. With all 600 men watching, Cortez handed a torch to 11 of his leaders, and he said, "Burn the boats. Burn the boats." And the men on the shore just gasped in horror. Burn the boats? How are we going to get home, Cortez? Cortez says, if you conquer, you'll go home in their boats. Otherwise, you won't go home at all. You know what he was saying? There is no plan B. He deliberately set up the situation in such a way that there could be no turning back, because Cortez knew something about human nature that's not new. It's something Jesus and Moses both knew about human nature. That is, as long as we think there's a plan B, as long as we think we can turn and run, we're going to be tempted to do that. But it's only when plan B is erased, the boats are burned, and it comes down to we're either going to conquer or we're not going to make it. We're going to do this or we're going to die. And you know, the greatest achievements are often made by people who are in a situation just like that. It's do or die. Well, Cortez and his men, they did. And they went home rich men, changed the rest of their lives and the rest of their children's and their children's children's lives, because they burned the boats and they had no plan B. Now that is a story that could easily be used for any kind of motivational sermon or speech. Something about your career, something about your finances or your fitness goals. Nothing wrong with that. But that's not really why we're here today. Not in this place. We're here because of spiritual goals. We're here because there are things in each of our lives that are going to conquer us if we don't conquer them. There are things in my life that will eventually destroy me if I don't overcome them. Some of you immediately know the kind of thing I'm talking about, because there's something about the way your mind works, the way it has been programmed through the years. It works in a way that doesn't work. Do you know what I'm talking about? It works in a way that does not work. And so when you look back over the course of your life, you see a whole lot of good intentions that were never followed through on. You see a whole lot of positive projects that were started but never completed. Worthy goals that could have, would have changed your life, your children's life, your children's children's life, but somehow you just gave up. And long about now, some of us are realizing that we're in a situation where if we don't defeat some of the enemies of our soul, if we don't overcome some of the powerful forces that keep defeating us over and over again, if I continue allowing this to be my master, I'm as good as dead. Because I'm not going to have any real life. That's some of us. Some of us here have some enemy. It's an internal enemy. It's something within us. Don't be fooled into thinking the problem is out there somewhere. We all got challenges out there. But the biggest enemies are all within us. Our attitudes, our beliefs, our fears, our unbelief that things can ever really be better for us. You know, Jesus said, if you can believe, all things are possible to them that believe. He didn't guarantee that if you just believe, everything's going to happen the way you want it to. He said, if you believe, all things are possible. You got potential. Whereas if you don't believe there's any hope for you, your family, your future, well, if you don't believe, nothing good is possible at all, because you're not going to really try. I want to motivate you today to burn your boats in the way that a certain Bible character did. In the book of 1 Kings chapter 19, there's another group of you who have a different type treasure, a different type challenge. There are those of you who are doing fairly well in your personal life. You don't have any terrible personality hang-ups. You're able to get along with people fairly well. You have been pretty successful, but there is one area of life where you've never succeeded. You might have succeeded in career, in finances, in society. You may be well thought of, but the one area you've never really been victorious is in your relationship with God. And I guess what I mean by that is you've just never quite been able to get it together. And you realize that a lot of the things you've accomplished and accumulated, as good as they are, they're not going to last. And every day when you wake up and look in the mirror and you notice you're getting older, it becomes more obvious that a lot of the things that you always thought were so important in the first half of life are really kind of trivial. There's nothing there that's going to really outlast you. Nothing you're going to keep or take with you. And you know that, well, you know what a friend of mine discovered after he retired. Very successful man. But in the days after his retirement, he struggled with, well, what's next? Because his whole life it had been taking one step up after another, after another. But what happens when you get to the place there are no other steps? You know the old legend of Alexander the Great conquered the whole world. And then he sat down and cried because there was nothing left to conquer. Cried. There was nothing left to conquer, and so he had no further reason to live. And he did not live much longer, even though he was a young man. And the friend I'm talking about said something to me that I want to pass on to you. He said, Lance, I've discovered that in the second half of life, your real goals are all spiritual. See, in the first half of life, we've got to set financial goals, career goals. We got to do things in order to make it in this material world. That's as it should be. But if you pass midlife and you start getting into the 50s and the 60 category and beyond, and you haven't made a shift to where the focus and all that energy that once went into career and finances, you got to get to the place where that is shifted and refocused on some spiritual goals that will really make your life count for something, so that you don't die miserable, empty, wondering why you even had this last 20 years of life. Truth is, the last 20, especially the last 10 years of life, can be spiritually the most productive, because by then most people have the material stuff taken care of enough to be able to focus. But when you've spent your whole life focused on earthly goals, it's hard to make that shift. It's hard to make a shift to a whole new way of thinking, a whole new priority set, a way of seeking God that actually results in you finding God. I talked about Cortez and his treasure. Jesus talked about a treasure hidden in the field. And the treasure hidden in the field was worth more than the field itself. The treasure hidden in the field is a relationship with God. That is something very close to all of us. It's within reach. It's buried somewhere close to you, very close to you. But you're going to have to dig and get really determined about seeking it if you want to find it. And you got to get so decisive that you burn the boats. That is, you let go of things that used to be ultimately important, because you realize the things that helped you in the last season of life are not going to really get you where you want to go in this season. Burn them, let them float away, and you get really decisive about what God's doing in your life now. And now with that in mind, read with me 1 Kings 19. Verse 19 through 21. So Elijah went and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, plowing a field. There were 12 teams of oxen in the field, and Elisha was plowing with the 12th team. Elijah went over to him and threw his cloak across his shoulders, then walked away. Now, stop and let me talk about what that meant, the significance. Elijah was the greatest prophet in Israel. Moses had been the greatest leader. And both those men had this physical object that was associated with them. It's something they carried with them everywhere they went. For Moses, it was his staff. It was the staff that he'd thrown down in Pharaoh's court, and it became a serpent. It was the staff that he waved over the Nile River, turning it to blood. It was the staff that he held over the Red Sea and called back the waters. That staff was a big deal with Moses. Well, with Elijah, it was his cloak made of camel hair. It was the piece of clothing that set him apart. He was a wild man. He lived in the wilds. He, like John the Baptist, lived on locusts and wild honey, which is a way of saying he could live off the land. And he came by, you got to remember Elijah, now an old man. His work is almost done. All the work he's done for God, the relationship he's developed with God through the years, it's about over. He's soon leaving, and he's got to pass this on to somebody else. And Elisha is his choice. So he walked by Elisha, who was plowing in the field. Think about that. Nothing wrong with plowing in the field. He was doing exactly what he was supposed to be doing. He was working for a living, earning his living by the sweat of his brow. Nothing wrong with what he was doing up until that moment when he was called upon to do something totally different. You see, when God comes to you with something new, a new task for a new season of life, a new treasure he's asking you to seek, because in this season of life you're finally ready to seek it and find it. If you tried earlier, you would not have been able to. But he knows you're ready now. And he's not frustrated. It's not that you've been doing wrong all these years by plowing away, doing your duty. You were doing the right thing. But sooner or later, in the midst of doing what you do, doing what you're supposed to do, and Elijah comes by and throws a cloak on you, and you realize you've just been summoned. You realize you've been summoned to let go of the life you have in order to reach out and grab the life that's waiting for you. Oh, do you know what I'm talking about? There comes a time when you have to let go of the life you've had in order to reach out and grab the life that's waiting for you. Some of you have heard me tell about the trapeze artist. It's one of my favorite illustrations of this point. Sometime in your life, whether in person or on television, you've seen a circus. You've seen the daring young man on the flying trapeze. And you know how one man or woman on one bar, high up at the top of the tent, grabs that bar and swings out toward the middle. And as they do that, one of their partners on the other end of the tent takes a bar and slings it, shoots it toward them. Here's the thing, though. The length of those cables is such that they don't actually crash together. They just come very close, and they time it perfectly. So what happens is you're swinging out across there with a lot of forward momentum, and you see that other trapeze coming your way, and you know it's got your name on it. And you know that you're going to have to grab it, but it's just out of reach. And so you're going to have to do something really scary. You're going to have to let go of the trapeze you're holding on to, and for a split second sail through midair holding on to nothing in order to reach the one that's coming towards you. And it's a scary thing to do, because you're letting go of what's brought you this far. And there's nothing bad about it, but there's going to be something bad about it if you don't let go. Because a lot of you know what I'm going to say. If you don't let go, if you don't leap and grab the one that's coming your way, you're going to swing back. And if you'll kick hard enough, you might make it almost all the way back to the platform, but not all the way. And you'll swing, swing, swing back and forth. Each time, your trip is shorter until you get to where you're hanging there dangling, and nobody can help you then. And what I'm saying is, one season of your life may be about holding on, gloriously swinging through the air, but the time's coming. Watch it. Whatever it is you've been trusting in, whatever it is about you that makes you you, your smarts, your position, your strength, your guts, your reputation, beauty, whatever it is that has given you momentum in life is only going to take you so far. And that doesn't mean there's something wrong with it. It just means it can only take you so far. Then what? Then what? Then you can count on God to send another trapeze your way. And that's when you got to let go of what's always worked and leap for something new. That's what was happening with Elijah and Elisha. So what did Elisha do? After Elijah swung the trapeze to him, he grabbed it. He left the oxen standing there, ran after Elijah, said to him, "Let me first go and kiss my father and mother goodbye, then I'll go with you." Elijah replied, "Go on back, but think about what I have done to you. Go back, tell your mama and daddy goodbye. Don't be rude about it. You don't have to cut all your ties with all the people and all the good things in the past, but still you're saying goodbye to life as you knew it, Elisha." And so Elisha returned to his oxen and slaughtered them. Slaughtered them. 2 big oxen. Wham! In the head. Wham! He used the wood from the plow to build a fire to roast their flesh. He passed around the meat to the townspeople, and they all ate. Then he went with Elijah as his assistant. You know what Elisha did when he slaughtered those oxen? He burned the boats. There was no going back. When Jesus came walking by Matthew's tax collector booth and said, "Come, follow me and be my disciple." And Matthew stood up with all that money piled on the table and walked away following Jesus. He was burning the boats. The job he had was a lucrative job, buddy. Tax collectors got rich in the Roman Empire. We don't have time to go there. But it was a job that if he left it behind, somebody else was going to grab it immediately. If this didn't work out, following Jesus stuff, if this didn't go well, there was no plan B. There was no going back to his old job. The boats were burned. The plow stock was burned. The oxen were dead. The new trapeze was in his hand, and he swung forward. And he had to do it fairly quickly, without a lot of time to think about it. In fact, Elisha had a little more time to make his decision than Matthew did. But that reminds me of something I heard a wise man say once. And this is a statement that you can apply to any area of life, but today we're applying it to your spiritual life. Whether you need to go after a new treasure, or whether you've got to conquer an internal enemy, whatever it is for you, it's time to make a decision. Time to make a decision, because the boats are burning. And here's the way it works. I'm going to put this on the screen. It's from Andy Andrews, and it goes like this. Successful people make decisions quickly, and they change their minds slowly. Whereas unsuccessful people make their decisions slowly. They have trouble making a decision at all, and when they do, they change their mind quickly. In any area of life, if you're going to conquer your demons and find freedom, if you're going to seek God with all your heart, your mind, and soul, and find the treasure that you've never been able to grasp, you've heard about it, and I'm not just talking about being a Christian. I'm talking about having a living, breathing, authentic relationship with God, where He becomes very real to you. You've heard about that. You've heard other people talk about it. You probably don't think you can have it, and you're half right. You cannot have that as long as you keep operating the way you're operating. You can't, the way you're headed doesn't lead there. the way you're operating may not be a bad way, but it's not the way that leads to life. You know, Jesus said, narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that find it. If you pay attention to that scripture, he didn't say narrow is the way that leads to eternal life. He's not talking about being saved or unsaved. He's talking about life, having an abundant, joy-filled life here, in the place of misery and addiction and unforgiveness and bitterness and sour spirit and worry constant. There is a way beyond all that, but it's narrow. It's not easy to find, but if you're determined, you can find it. And then once you find it, it's not easy to walk. If you're determined to walk it, you can walk it. But you've got to get decisive. I heard once about 4 seagulls. Got this riddle for you. 4 seagulls were sitting on a pier. 4 seagulls sitting on a pier. One decided to fly away. How many were left? 4. Because that one decided to, but he didn't. Big difference in deciding to do something and doing something different. In closing, let's go back to Cortez. He was out to capture a treasure nobody before had been able to capture. He was out to do something that had never been done before. And so, guess what? He had to do something that had never been done before. If you want to have something you've never had before, you got to do something you've never done before. And if you want to conquer something you've never been able to conquer before, you got to be willing to do some things you've never been willing to do before. Sooner or later, because time is passing, sooner or later, you just got to get to the point where you burn the boats and say, no turning back. No turning back. You know, I want to say one thing in particular that you can do in light of what you've heard. You know, the Bible says don't just be a hearer of the word, deceiving yourselves, but be a doer of the word. Don't just decide to fly away. Fly away. One thing that most people aren't willing to do, whether it has to do with conquering something that keeps conquering you, or whether it has to do with finding a treasure that has always eluded you, most people aren't willing to call upon another human being sincerely and say, I need this, but I don't know how to find it. You seem to have it. Could you tell me what you know? Could we get together and have lunch, have coffee once a week for a while? Tell me what you've done that brought you to where you are. That's a hard thing to do. Most people won't do it. And you know what else? The older we get, the less likely we are to do it. Because the harder it is to admit that we ain't got it. Or that we don't have complete victory. That's a starting place. Reach out to somebody in the next 24 hours.